My name is Sarah Radway, and I'm going to be talking to you about our paper, An Investigation of U.S. Universities' FERPA Student Directory Policies and Student Privacy Preferences, which I worked on with my wonderful co-authors, Katherine Quintanilla, Cordelia Ludden, and Daniel Votipka. To begin, I'll provide a little background surrounding FERPA. FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, is a U.S. federal privacy law, which states that schools cannot disclose student records without student consent, or parent consent if the student is under 18. Student records are documents produced by academic institutions. For example, we can think about things like report cards, financial aid reports, or attendance records. Student directory information is a type of student record, and it is the focus of our paper and the remainder of our talk. While, as we discuss, institutions choose their own directory information definitions, the Department of Education generally defines it to be information such as name, address, date and place of birth, participation in officially recognized activities and sports, and dates of attendance. Student directory information is given a special exception under FERPA. Namely, this exception states that directory information can be shared without student consent, as long as the school shares their definition of directory information and the opt-out process in a public notice. This usually takes the form of a message posted on the university website or in an email. In our paper, we address two research questions surrounding directory information. First, we evaluate what the current practices are surrounding student directory information. We do this by surveying available online resources and directly contacting registrars at the Forbes Top 100 universities. Second, we evaluate how well the practices we observe in the real world fit student preferences. We do so by conducting a between subjects vignette study of 991 U.S. university students. When we answer these two research questions, we address three main features of directory information sharing practices. For each feature, we evaluate current practices and how they align with current student preferences, so our two research questions. First, we look at data sharing policies, so what data universities share and who they share it with. Second, we evaluate the opt-out mechanisms in place, how students can opt out of directory information sharing. Then, we evaluate opt-out effects. We look at what statements are made surrounding what will happen if a student does choose to opt out. We'll begin by discussing current practices surrounding directory information. So directory information is largely shared in two ways, online and offline. The online format may look familiar to some of you. Universities share searchable directories online containing student information. However, it's less widely known that universities also can share directory information whenever an individual requests it, either by email or by phone. And in this paper, we examine the amount of and types of information shared both online and offline. We see that universities define a wide range of personally identifiable information and educational information to be directory information. This is shown in the offline table on the right, and these offline values represent the upper bound of information that can be shared with third parties offline. Regarding online sharing, we find that many universities host online directories frequently containing student contact information. For example, we often see students' name and emails, and even see phone numbers and addresses in some directories. We further validate concerns surrounding offline sharing beyond this upper bound through submitting a series of FOIA requests to public universities. We find that student records are being shared offline with a variety of parties, including advertising firms and data brokers. For example, we observed that LexisNexis requested and received data including the student's name, postal address, personal email address, school email, major, and academic status. We also observe how this sharing is presented to students. We see that most universities do not provide information surrounding both to whom and for what reasons directory information will be shared. We do see 6 universities state who they will not share directory information with. For example, 2 universities state that they will not share directory information with organizations looking to prepare mailing lists or otherwise solicit students. In terms of how these current practices surrounding data sharing inform our survey design, we begin the survey by presenting participants with a directory information definition, which we pull from common occurrences in our real-world definitions. After that, we present participants with these definitions and with a data sharing policy. We draw these sharing policies from the findings of our evaluation of current practices, where we largely see 4 types of sharing. Not stated, which is the most common system where no policy is provided. Third parties, where any third party can request student data. Third parties for direct use, where the registrar evaluates whether there is any direct benefit to students of the data being shared. And lastly, institutional, where data is only available to parties within the institution. One interesting high-level takeaway we find is that when no sharing policy is provided, participants assume the worst. We see that the comfort under not stated is the same as under third parties, meaning that participants are likely equating these 2 policies. We also see, less surprisingly, that students have higher comfort when greater limitations are placed on data sharing, with highest levels of comfort reported for institutional sharing. Next, we investigate the mechanisms by which students opt out, beginning with current practices. When students wish to opt out, we see the first steps vary greatly. Some universities do not have standardized opt-out processes, instead requesting students contact registrars with any and all information they wish not be disclosed. Further, we see 14 universities require students to come in person to opt out. Lastly, we see many universities require students to opt out by a certain date, for example, the second week of the semester, or on a repetitive basis, for example, every year or every semester. It is likely these limitations discourage students from opting out. However, when it comes to the actual mechanisms by which students may opt out, we largely see 4 types. The first and most common is the FERPA block. As shown on screen, the FERPA block allows students only a binary choice, opt out of all sharing or opt into all sharing. The second type of sharing is data type suppression. Students are presented with a series of data types and asked to click to opt out of sharing this data type. This system provides control over what data is shared, but not with whom. The third type of sharing is scenario-based sharing, where students are presented with different scenarios in which they would or would not want their data shared. For example, as shown on screen, students may choose whether their information is shared in the commencement program, or whether their academic program information can be shared with third parties outside the university. This system doesn't provide comprehensive control over who and what, but rather a series of common scenarios. Lastly, role-based sharing provides students with control over both what data is shared and with whom, through presenting students with each data type, for example, degree, honors, and awards shown on screen. And then students may select which parties this information is shared with, providing comprehensive control over both what data is shared and with whom, but with much more effort required from the student. We see that the least comprehensive systems tend to be the most common in practice. In terms of how this informed our survey design, after we evaluated student comfort with their assigned data sharing policy, we present participants with an opt-out mechanism and ask them to evaluate their comfort after being given the option to opt out. We also evaluate how well participants felt their assigned mechanism aligns with their preferences, likewise on the Likert scale. We look at 4 different opt-out mechanisms: FERPA block, data type suppression, scenario-based access, and role-based access. The opt-out choices, as shown on screen, are drawn from our findings in the previous survey. Regarding findings from our student survey, we see that across the board, student comfort increases after being presented with opt-out options. Looking at the figure, we see that green represents a positive change in comfort on the Likert scale, whereas red represents a negative change. And obviously, we see a lot more green. This was especially the case for more extreme data sharing scenarios, for example, third parties. We also observed that students preferred all other opt-out systems to FERPA block, which is the most common system currently. Lastly, we discussed the effects that are presented to students when they go to opt out. In the course of our investigation, we also noticed that in the process of opting out, students were often presented with effects of opt-outs. For example, we found that 40 universities warned that information will not be shared with third parties. For example, one university states, "Opting out will prevent the university from providing your directory information to your friends, prospective employers, and others with whom you may wish to share such information. So make your decision carefully." Similarly, 32 universities warned information will be withheld from internal use, for example, from publications, commencement programs, or awards, and 7 universities warned that messages, mailings, and announcements won't be delivered. We were interested to understand how these effects impact student decision-making. Therefore, after the students have opted out, we presented them with the effects of opting out and asked them to opt out again. While universities do not do so, we include privacy effects in order to understand how students would feel if this information was provided. An example effect associated with third-party sharing is shown on screen. We see opting out will prevent third parties from using your data for advertising or otherwise unauthorized purposes. We then include the functional effects of opting out that we present in the previous slide. So for example, you might not receive mailing, messages, and announcements from your school, department, or other university groups. After seeing these effects, we then ask participants to opt out again and to rate their comfort. Regarding findings from our survey, we see that comfort with their choices decreases after seeing the effects of opting out, especially for FERPA block systems. This makes sense, as students have the least control to adapt to these effects under FERPA block. We also see that students often remove their opt-outs after seeing the effects of opting out, especially for FERPA block. Overall, we see that students consider both the privacy and functional effects when making their opt-out choices. We see that while students opt out of less data types, their comfort does not increase in turn. Rather, our extended responses from students suggest that they feel trapped, with no choice. As one student states, "I am not satisfied with the current level of privacy I have selected, but it appears that I don't have a choice. In order to stay up to date with my university, it seems I have to relinquish my qualms against third parties seeing my information." Given these results, our paper outlines a series of policy impacts, both for university leadership and for federal policymakers. Regarding universities, we provide a series of recommendations which may improve alignment of directory practices with student privacy preferences. In our experience with university registrars, we have seen that they are striving to act in the student's best interest, but are often functioning with limited time and resources. Therefore, we expect many registrars would adopt simple changes, providing direct benefit to students as we wait for the government to enact broader changes. Our findings suggest that universities should explicitly tell students who they will or will not share data with, as when no sharing policy is provided, students assume the worst policy. Therefore, this added transparency will not decrease student comfort. Additionally, if universities do choose to share data with third parties, universities should tailor their third-party sharing to cases that are useful for students. Universities also would increase student autonomy and comfort by limiting the need for functional and privacy effects, and sharing all necessary effects with students, as it was shown that students do consider these effects in their decisions. For example, universities could investigate changing system implementations such that students will not be missing university announcements if they choose to not share directory information. Lastly, universities should turn away from all-or-nothing systems such as FERPA block. These systems had the lowest levels of comfort and were the least aligned with student preferences. Additionally, we provide recommendations for federal policymakers. First, we believe federal policymakers should reconsider the need for broad carve-outs, where certain data is declared exempt from coverage. While these structures may have made sense in the days before surveillance capitalism, it is clear that today much of this personal data has value. Additionally, there are currently templates available for schools to use for the Student Directory Information Exemption public notice. However, these templates are generally not providing privacy-sensitive frameworks. Creating templates that provide both privacy and functional effects, and provide definitions of sharing practices and comprehensive mechanisms for opting out, would increase the likelihood universities will implement these practices, as they often use aspects of these templates in their own systems. Lastly, we believe this paper will be useful in considering how to implement federal general privacy legislation. Current proposals, such as the ADPPA, do not confirm how overlapping legislation will be interpreted, but rather state that the FTC will be in charge of deciding how to interpret the law at these overlaps. Our paper helps demonstrate the harm of leaving these current exemptions in place in their current form, and demonstrates that the FTC ought to take action to mitigate these harms when the time comes. So that wraps up our presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to answering your questions.